Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our February fireside chat. Tonight, we are going to be talking about multi-tiered support systems, support and management techniques, both inside and outside of the classroom. My name is Brittany Woodruff. I'm a life member of the Pi chapter at Auburn University, and I'm going to be your moderator for tonight. Fireside chats are a part of the Building Bridges, Building Brothers program, which is designed to be the signature personal and professional development program for the Kappa Kappa Psi Alumni Association. This chat is being recorded and broadcast live on Facebook and will not be edited in any way. Please remember this as you make any comments. If you have any questions about tonight's topic, use the chat and I will do my best to include it at the end if time allows. And now we are going to have our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. They're going to give their name, their chapter at university, and their current career. And we'll get started with Paula.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paula Kaiser. I use the she, her pronouns. I am a life member from the Iota Lambda chapter at the University of Mount Union in Ohio. Professionally, I am an eighth grade English teacher in the Cleveland area, but I also work at the Cleveland Zoo seasonally throughout the year as well. So most of my answers are going to be geared towards the educational side of things, with some also a few answers that could be related to my experience working at the zoo and guest services as a guest experiences supervisor. So very excited to be here tonight, and I'm excited to hear from all of you tonight as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Paula. Next, we'll have Jason.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jason Morkos. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an alumni member from the Iota chapter at the Georgia Institute of Technology, aka Georgia Tech. My background is in software engineering, but I'm a VP of engineering. I run an engineering team at a small healthcare technology company. So my background is much more around managing people, and that's I think what I'm going to bring here today on that side of things.
Thank you, Jason. And we'll wrap up with Craig.
Good evening, brothers. My name is Craig Arhus. I'm one of the associate directors of the Maroon Band at Mississippi State University. I'm a life member of the Pi chapter. I'm also one of the co-sponsors of the Epsilon chapter here at Mississippi State. And I served for 10 years as one of the governors of the Southeast District. So my perspective here will be from that of the college band program, which I think seems to complement nicely what the other panelists are bringing as well. So I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Awesome. We will hop straight into it with questions. Our first question is, how would you define multi-tiered support systems as they apply to your current role? And how do you see that showing up in your work, even if it's not formally labeled as MTSS? And for this one, we'll start with Jason.
Awesome. I think this is really interesting because I think MTSS is something that I've thought a lot about, but never labeled it that way. So, multi-tiered support systems are, in my mind, it's about meeting people where they're at. Some people will say that they have a management style or a management philosophy. I think that's great. But I think that really that would be prescribing to this belief that everybody's the same, and everybody's not the same. And they're not even the same one day to the next. So for a multi-tiered support system, I think it's about meeting people where they're at so that their needs are met as an employee in my field of work, and so that my needs are met as a manager. And I think both of those needs are important. And that's what it's really about to me, and not taking a one-size-fits-all approach, but managing people in a way that's going to be effective for them. For some people, that's really hands-off. And if they're meeting expectations, that's great. But then there's a nice middle tier where you're a little more hands-on. And then, of course, in my field, we start to get to the point where we're pipping people, we're taking pretty severe corrective action. But it's really that sliding scale, and it's about being fair and meeting people with a degree of autonomy that they are pretty ready to handle for that point of time.
Awesome. Next, we'll go with Craig.
Well, kind of like Jason said, these are things that you think about, but you don't necessarily put the MTSS label on them. When you have a large college band program with students from all different backgrounds, I think what we're looking to try to do in our program is to be proactive, to try to help students be successful academically, musically, personally, socially. A lot of what we do goes in that direction, and And so a lot of the way that our program is set up is actually geared to try to assist with those things, whether it really has this label of MTSS or not. So it's sort of embedded into the way we do things, our system, our way of doing things that hopefully helps our students be successful in those different areas.
Awesome. And Paula.
Alrighty, so it was super interesting hearing something the perspective of not the educational side of things because that's so much of what my focus is. So for me, I describe MTSS more so in the traditional academic sense, where we look at where kids are where they're at, and which I like that both Jason and Craig's answers kind of supported that. So it was interesting to hear that that happens in the real world too, which I know, but it's also just reassuring to hear that too. So when I look at MTSS, I look at how we can support the whole student. So again, how we can support them academically, behaviorally, cognitively, emotionally, and just looking at the whole child picture of where they're at in class. Because if you're not in the right place mentally, you're not going to be able to be successful in the academic side of things as well, or if like something that you need more support in that can help you be successful. So we look at it kind of at the whole picture of what can we do to put all of the puzzle pieces together. And when we use it, and I'll kind of dive into this with some of the other questions later, at least in the education setting, it looks so different, kind of what your school has in place too. So it could look very structured depending on what supports are already in place at your school, or it could look very different. So I'm going to speak for a lot of the later questions about what my experience has been in a couple of different school districts and in my current role as well. So very excited to continue diving into this. But really, when I look at MTSS, it's how we can support kids and students where they're at currently, but also looking towards the future of what supports can we put in place. Since I teach eighth grade English, they are 13 and 14 years old, so their brains are not fully developed. So that's a key part of that as well, is just keeping that in mind that they are kids too. So very excited to dive into the rest of these.
Awesome. And real quick, if you're tuning in and you're like, I don't know what MTSS is, multi-tiered support systems are pretty much the idea that most of the people that you support, whether that's students or people that you're managing, need like the 90% of them need like your base level attention. The next like 7% or so need kind of more guided instruction, and then the top like 3% need kind of more hand holding. So if you were wondering what that was, there's a little more context to it. So like we were saying, tier one of MTSS is kind of the universal instruction and support of all students, and about somewhere between 80 and 90% of students are able to thrive with this level of support. So what does strong tier one support look like in your setting, and how do you make sure that those supports are effective and that those supports are effective? And for this one, we'll start with Craig.
Well, obviously, our goal as a large band organization is we want our students and our program to be successful. And we won't go into, all the different ways that you define success. But as you said, Brittany, I think for the large majority of students in our program, the tier one support helps them. And I think for us, what we try to do in this area is to be as thorough in our system and its implementation as possible. Students coming in, do they know what the expectations are? If they know what the expectations are from us, are they able to count on consistent instruction, consistent reinforcement of those goals and those expectations? Are we fostering a culture and environment where they feel like they belong? Is this a good home for them? And this is not something that is just the three of us who are directors work at implementing. This is something that we also spread amongst our leadership team. And our leadership team is a little bit larger than maybe in other band programs because we won't just have a single section leader for a section. We might have 5 or 6 what we call squad leaders, and each of them is responsible for 7 or 8 other people in their section, and that helps keep the lines of communication a little more accessible because you're not having to think, I've got to talk to the the big scary directors. We can go to we can talk to our leadership team, and then they can in turn let us know if there are things that are going on that with individuals where we might need to look at the next level. But I do think that if we're consistent, if we set clear expectations, if we're consistent with our instruction, our teaching, we do a good job with the teaching, and we create a culture of belonging, then that hopefully means that 80 to 90% of the people participating are able to thrive in that environment.
Awesome. I love the idea of setting clear expectations and fostering a welcoming culture. Let's go with Paula.
Alrighty. So for me, I'll start with first my teaching experience with this. So for me, tier one looks like just first having good first instruction. So I think that's part of the key is making sure that everything that you're doing as the teacher, you have teacher clarity with, that you are doing a lot of modeling of what you're teaching in class. So if you're going through something that might be new, you have to model that and then again, more often than not, 80 to 90% of those students will be successful. Kind of following that up with guided practice. Having almost anticipating what you know students might need help with is also kind of key for this too. So anticipating what you need to know ahead of time. But I think also part of that goes into what students need to know too. So again, if you're in the education world, these are all words that are very familiar to you. So like having clear learning targets and success criterias, but also making it student friendly too. So again, depending on if you teach second grade or 12th grade, what looks different in second grade is going to look very different of what you need to do for your like baseline instruction in 12th grade. And I think also part of what good tier one instruction and MTSS looks like is having those systems in place too to support students. So starting with like universal screenings or benchmarks assessments, that could be your pre-tests at the beginning of your unit, even just entrance and exit slips, and then continuing on with that follow through throughout your lessons, and throughout your class time as well. Having those clear expectations, and then just making sure that students are set up for success. So for me, a lot of what we do, kind of when we're introducing something, is we have a lot of teacher modeling and a lot of teacher practice with it, just to make sure that students are set up for success. And so even just like reflecting back on my teaching career as well, when students have been the most confused or when they haven't felt the most success is when we haven't done those things to help them. So it could be that we didn't maybe model it enough, that they didn't have that good first instruction. Maybe how it was worded was not student friendly. So again, thinking about the whole student and what is going to be the most successful for them. But then kind of switching gears a little bit into my job at the zoo as well. So one of the things that I do is I'm a supervisor for guest services. So I oversee all of our rides, parking, and attraction staff, and our ticket takers and cashiers at the Cleveland Zoo. So part of what we do is a lot of that baseline training. So when we get new hires and they're starting their first couple days, they start with one of our supervisors, so myself and some of my other staff as well. And we train them in that good first training to make sure that they understand kind of what they need to do in order to be successful as well. And then kind of throughout that process, depending on if they pick up on things or if they need more training in that, then in a way we kind of look at tier two system, tier two MTSS, and then specifically if they need even more than that, we would kind of narrow down our focus more to what they need the most help with. So a lot of that is kind of that ongoing job coaching as well, kind of that on the spot, making sure that they are on the same page, especially with when you're operating rides, there's a lot of things that you have to consider with that as well. So really focusing on that. I guess the bottom line is that focusing on whether you're at the workplace or at school, kind of that baseline of good first instruction and good first training.
Yeah, love that. Setting clear expectations and modeling. I think that's really useful. And then Jason.
Yeah, it was interesting listening, from a business perspective and hearing both you, Paula and Craig, talk about, Craig more of the first question, but Paul on this one about proactivity. And I think that's so important to be proactive about trying to identify issues and keep people in this area. So to me, I really think of tier one as being employee driven. So I manage people in a remote first workplace. And where I think a solid tier one place is, the employees are really responsible fully for their success, right? Now I set up you got to set up systems in place to ensure people stay on track, regular check-ins. I could scream and jump up and down about clear expectations because I think that is so vitally important. How can you expect people to do something if it's not clear what they need to do? But I really think of it as heavily employee driven. And so to me, that's about setting those expectations from the get-go. That's having strong onboarding. I have onboarding schedules we take employees through. We create onboarding partners so that they have people that help bring them up to speed. I liked the discussion a lot too about, we call it psychological safety and more of a workplace standpoint, but it's really important to not have people at a level of stress, because if they're at a level of stress, they're not going to be as effective. They're going to be worried about other things. So being inclusive, psychologically safe. I also liked Craig's point about the squad leaders, because it makes you think about small teams. I split up one of my teams about 6 months ago because I felt like the people weren't getting the attention that they needed. And if people aren't getting the attention that they need, you're not setting those clear expectations. How can you reasonably expect people to be in tier one? And if you're in a real business environment, if you want to bring somebody along to tier two or tier three, I mean, we start talking about documentation. It has to be abundantly clear that the expectations have been set from the get-go. And so, in my opinion, too, it's unfair to move somebody into a different part of this process without being sure that we've given a real college try at that tier one support. But we have a lot of things, I think, in a remote first setting, rituals, as we might call them. But in our case, that's things like code reviews and weekly sprint plannings and biweekly retrospectives and these kinds of things. That's the same thing around clear expectations, but also consistency, providing people an environment where they can expect what's going to happen next, where they can anticipate, if I do this, this will happen. And then I also, while I say it's employee driven, I think that you do need to give people kind of that same consistency in their schedules and give them clear opportunities to raise issues. So like I am a manager of managers, but I do recurring monthly one-on-ones with everybody who is more than one level below me. So they have opportunities to raise concerns and issues. And for about everybody who reports to me, I do weekly one-on-ones. It doesn't matter if nothing's come up. I want to give them that opportunity to raise an issue, because that's that same thing about proactivity. Sometimes that barrier just to reach out and message somebody, especially at a higher level in a company, can be enough to keep somebody from getting that help that they need. But instead, if I can identify that issue early, I can get somebody on track, because I think everybody wins if everybody stays in that first tier, right? You don't want to be, nobody wants to be in those situations where you have to be more hands-on. It's not fun for anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to note the parallels between, being scared to go to your college band director and also being scared to go to your boss's boss. It's not something that you really think about until it's kind of put in that perspective for you. Our next question, what early indicators help you identify when someone may need additional support? Do you notice, is it data driven? Is it noticing behaviors or performance shifts or something else? And for this one, we'll start with Jason.
Oh, I get to keep talking right away. All right. Uh, so I manage mostly software engineers, some hardware firmware engineers, but what's great about these fields is we have tons of data. And so we're incredibly fortunate in that regard. And so when we have tons of data on everybody, now I want to be clear, we don't report on people's individual data. That doesn't get reported up, but it's really a great sign for us to be looking at to see if things are getting off track, right? If somebody's been always getting their things done, and then for a couple of weeks they stop getting their things done, that's a great indicator to step in proactively and start to do something about it. So some of that is, in other fields, you might have missed deadlines, poor communication, especially in a remote first setting. We really do rely on good communication, because if you say you're going to do something and it doesn't get done, that really can create issues. But I also think we need to approach people looking for patterns and assume good. Like, even if somebody is working really hard, doing great, sometimes things are going to go wrong. Sometimes they're going to have an illness, sickness in the family. They're going to get, something's going to come up. Things happen. And so I also think it's really important to not overweight one instance or one thing, especially like when I'm prepping annual performance reviews. I actually start prepping about 6 months in advance, taking notes of positive or negative things that people do, because I don't want to be in a situation at the end of the year where it's all recency bias. I'm looking at everything they did in the last 3 weeks because that's all that I remember. And so I think a key thing with the early indicators is start noting them, but look for a pattern. We don't need to intervene with people off of a one-off. Sometimes even two, three times something can happen. You understand, you want to seek understanding. We're always having these conversations seeking understanding, but you don't necessarily need to escalate something unless it becomes a pattern. And that's what I really am looking for is patterns of suboptimal behavior.
Yeah, pattern identification is important. Next we'll go with Craig.
Well, I think in our environment with a lot of students, you could maybe look for changes in performance habits or behaviors or expectations, and then you could actually look at see if there are some behavioral cues. We do have a lot of students, and we do try to interact with them as much as we can, but maybe what we deal with might be a little more challenging to identify this than say maybe Paula in her smaller classroom or Jason with his team. And once again, this is where we hope that our students, our student leadership team is able to help and not just them, but others as well. I mean, we set out at the very beginning and explain as best we can. We do have an open door policy, and if there's no more issues that are important to us than student issues. And I think our students know if they bring us a concern about a student or about an issue that's going on that needs addressing, we'll do our best to address it. And we can't address things that we don't know about. So, if there's something that's happening where students maybe are showing up less prepared, that might be obvious to us as directors. But if they're becoming a little more withdrawn in their section, that may not be something that's as obvious to us unless we have some help from our students. And we do provide some training for this. And we also try to set boundaries for them too, because our leaders are great leaders, but they're not counselors, they're not psychologists, they're not teachers. We don't put that burden on them. We just say if there is an issue that you think needs to be addressed, not asking you to place a value judgment on it, but just let us know. You may be the first time you've encountered it, but maybe we've seen something before and can help if the tier one, if we're starting to elevate potentially to one of the other tiers. So and it's I think you want to try to also take into account that an isolated incident may not be a pattern. That sometimes you just may be struggling for the day. You may have failed a chemistry test, or you may have had a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend. I mean, there are things you could bring into the rehearsal that could say, well, something must be going on here. But no, it's just a bad day. We're all allowed those. But if these things seem to be a pattern, then that's where we try to see if we can step in and see what else might need to be done.
Awesome. And Paula.
So to kind of echo what Jason and Craig both said, I think similar in the education lens, we see a lot with pattern-based things as well. So again, that could be what Craig was saying about just changes in behavior when it comes to just the emotional and behavioral side of things, or it could be changes in work performance, like Jason mentioned as well too. So for us, a lot of it is at least in my role, is more so assessment driven, and just kind of like patterns of like formative, so like quick checks at the end of a lesson. So seeing if when we have assessments, if a student for us, in order to kind of move to that next tier level of support, if a student has a consistent pattern of 3 or more assessment scores below a 70%, we meet with them, we set a goal, and then we again kind of determine, do you need to be moved into maybe an academic support class for ELA or math? And that's where we work on more of those targeted skills, or if it's like maybe for us, like if our test is on informational text and informational is not your strong suit, but you've had a pattern of being more successful when it comes to literary passages, we'll kind of keep that in mind as well. But seeing that pattern of consistency and kind of taking into what's going on in their personal lives as well. So if you've had some ongoing home challenges too. Maybe again, you've had some unstable housing. Maybe you've had some significant changes in your family. And kind of taking that into consideration as well. So that's really when we look to see Not only is it just a one specific class thing, or is it across the board as well? So for us, at my current school, we have weekly team meetings. So that's with our team of teachers, so our ELA, math, science, social studies, and health and PE teachers. So we all meet with our assistant principal and our head principal, along with our school psychologist and our guidance department as well. So that's really where we start to bring up students that maybe are becoming a little bit more flagged on our radar. So that could be changes in behavior that we were seeing, or in terms of maybe they have always been kind of like that happy-go-lucky kid, and then we're starting to see them maybe being a little bit more withdrawn, maybe a little bit kind of more down in the dumps, or if we're starting to see like, hey, Jason's missing 3 assignments in English class, and then he's also missing them in math class too. Then kind of pulling them in to see like what's going on, what can we do to support you. And at my current school, we also have what's called a guided study hall. So it's a little bit more hands-on in terms of like how can, and it's a smaller group setting, so how can we get you to be more successful at working independently? Because again, maybe they don't have those executive functioning skills yet, and it's always something that we can teach them and support them in more. Because especially when they get to middle school, it is hard to balance 5, 6, 7 classes. Some of them are for high school credit. You're taking a world language that could be more challenging for you. You could be taking a math class that's 2 or 3 levels above where your current grade level is. So again, just kind of seeing how we can support all students, and determining if it's a pattern or if it's just a kind of more of a challenging topic as well in that specific class.
Awesome. Yeah, it feels like those are kind of identifying the patterns in behavior, are those big factors that guide the decision about moving someone from more informal support to kind of more targeted interventions. Our next question is, how do you balance being supportive without becoming intrusive or micromanaging, especially if you do have those really high performing or independent individuals? And for this one, we will start with Craig.
So balancing this is kind of tough because, we're dealing with adults, right? And you have to trust the adults that are in the room as best you can, but they're also, I mean, they're not eighth graders, right, Paula, but they're also not seasoned professionals like Jason's team. They're in that middle section. And so I think for us it's a matter of trying to be as specific and explicit about goals and expectations as we can be. And then if we have to offer some support, we offer it as that is an option, but not really is punishment. They're not, if we're moving to tier two, it's not because you're bad or anything's, we're just elevating what we're trying to do to help. And sometimes it's just that people need a little bit of space to grow and to settle, not necessarily pressure, but I think it helps them if they can know that that level of support from us, from our team, is there. It's there if they need it. And then, then you have to just see where that takes you, and then you have to follow up. You have to be consistent with that, and because ultimately, what this comes down to, I think this is probably understood, is that we have to take care of each other. We have to take care of our students that are entrusted to us for this short period of time, or our eighth graders, or our team, our adult worker team. We have to take care of them. And if somebody has an experience that requires something more than tier one, I hope that person would eventually say, those people really tried to help me, and they tried to help the situation. They cared about us, because ultimately that is what all of us remember about the important people in our life. Professionally, personally, socially, we are drawn to people that we perceive care about us. And if we are doing our job, hopefully, then that's something our students feel about us as well, especially if we have to navigate through some challenges.
Yeah, trust is for sure a big part of that, really navigating those relationships. Next we'll go with Paula.
So I'm going to answer this kind of in both the academic sense and then my job at the zoo sense. So to kind of go off of what Craig said, I think one of the things that's important, at least in the teaching sense, that I've noticed for when we're kind of like trying to be supportive but not overstepping or being like micromanaging, is a lot of times in my experience my students, they know that something might come easy to them, and but they also see that things come hard to them too. But I think in that lens, a lot of times students don't know how to voice what their struggle is. So I think in a way it's almost that I've noticed like they like when we say, hey, Brittany, can you come up and work with me, we're going to work through this together. Or if like when they have that pattern of kind of consistency, and not being successful on things, when we pull them in and say, hey, we're going to work through this, what else can we do to support you? Because I think a lot of times they're able to identify like, yes, this is hard, but they don't know the steps in order to reach that goal of being successful with that. So I think a lot of times for us is just being, like Craig said, that trusting helping hand, but also guiding them to what they need in order to be successful. So to kind of answer the flip side of this in my job experience at the zoo, so we have a very wide range of ages of our staff members. So we either have from 16-year-olds where it's their first job all the way up into retired folks where they are in their upper 70s and they just wanted some like a fun retired job. And so what I've noticed in kind of both areas is that especially with some of our newer staff members that maybe this is their first job, they're 16, 17, 18 years old, just navigating when a guest is not being nice to them and they're getting yelled at for something that is way beyond their control of, what do you mean we ran out of parking spots? Why can't you just create more of them? So like that first time is kind of a shell shock of when you're getting yelled at for something that is beyond your control. So I think a lot of that is just supporting them in that moment and even just providing that job coaching too. Because until you've gone through that moment, you don't know what to do. And you look towards the people that have been in that way. And then on the flip side of it, for some of our staff, we use a lot of technology, so a lot of like scanners to scan tickets, and the computer system for ticketing as well can sometimes be confusing for some of our folks that are not as technology driven, especially in some of our older generations. So for us, when a one of our staff members is scanning tickets and they're having trouble with it, so a lot of times we would provide that on the job or on the spot coaching for that as well, kind of showing them some of our tips and tricks of the trade for that and helping them be successful. And more often than not, a lot of them like hearing that because they don't know how to navigate even some of the like the challenging things with that, or even just finding that simpler way. So I think kind of going off of that trust, building trust with whoever you're working with is so important. So again, whether that's students in your classroom, whether that's 16-year-olds navigating their first job, or navigating people that maybe are experiencing things that they have not ever had in their jobs as well.
Yeah, what I feel like I'm hearing a little bit both from you and from Craig is on both sides is you don't know what you don't know. That's both in terms of like I don't physically know how to do this, but also I don't know that this is an issue. So I think that we're drawing some interesting parallels
I
between.
love hearing the perspective of both sides of your jobs because there are some similarities but some stark differences. That's very good to have this perspective.
For sure. And we'll go with Jason.
No, I really agree with everything that's being said. I think this is a really tough thing for managers. But something I like to remember is at the end of the day, people have a right to know where they stand. You never want to be surprised when you're fired or with a surprise performance review. People have a right to know where they stand. And so what I really mentor people who manage people below me, whatever, managers. What I mentor them to say is you do need to care. You should care about the people that work for you, but you also have to be very honest with them. Leave your feelings at the door. Provide them with concrete examples, both positive and negative, of behaviors that are good and behaviors that are bad, because people will tense up whenever you're providing any sort of feedback, right? That's natural. One of my things when I'm receiving feedback is I just write it all down. And it's like that writing it down keeps you almost in that out of that reactive state and keeps you recording it all. But you're really pushing for you're seeking understanding. You want to make them succeed. I mean, quite honestly, in a business standpoint, if you didn't want the people to succeed, you would fire them, right? I mean, that is the reality. So helping to communicate that you think they can succeed and you want to help them succeed. And then I think the one other thing from a strategy perspective is there's kind of two big schools of management, which is input-based management or output-based management. So input-based management is butts and seats, times that you're at the desk, times you're online, right? Controlling the inputs to the work. Versus outputs is did you deliver the project on time? Is the customer happy with how the system is working? Are we not having a lot of bugs? And I think part of why COVID was so transformative to a lot of industries was because a lot of managers were used to input-based management, which input-based management often does feel like micromanagement. I think back to the core question there, right? You must be in your desk at your seat for 40 hours a week, or else you must badge in 4 times a week. We're tracking your badge. But I think a much better way to manage people is output-based management. Are you meeting your objectives? Look, I don't care if you work from noon to midnight or 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or whatever you do, as long as the things that are asked of you are getting done, people are happy, your team is able to work with you, we're good. And I think keeping it focused on the outputs and not based on the inputs. So if you're giving someone feedback, if you're saying we need to move you to another tier, it's never about you're not spending enough time at your desk, you're not logging in early enough. It's your projects aren't being delivered on time. We're not meeting customer expectations. We're over budget, over deadline. And I think focusing on the outputs, the outcomes, can help people understand that you're not trying to micromanage them. You're just trying to make sure the company can succeed.
That goes really well into our next question of how do you communicate the decisions about when you have to move people from tier to tier in a way that like it does maintain trust and transparency between all involved groups. Jason, since you kind of started alluding to that, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, well, I put a little bit what I said there, but I guess to add, I mentioned setting expectations. We've all talked a lot about setting expectations. I think that so often we can assume that the expectations are clear. And if I'm going to move somebody to another degree of involvement, I'm going to take another try to really communicate the expectations. We're going to sit down, we're going to have a conversation, a really honest conversation about here's the expectation. Here's a few concrete examples of it not being met. I've seen you do this great before. Here's what I need to see. And you also want to be concrete about timelines. We really need to see this improve over the next several months. And then, especially in a business setting, this is just one little piece of advice is you really do need to write it down. Doesn't have to be in any specific way. It's different for every company, every system. But for instance, if I had a manager work for me, have to give some, tough feedback, reminders about expectations, they send a message to me. That manager, they send a message to me with like, this is what we discussed. Here's what the next steps are. Here's what happened. Because unfortunately, litigation is a real part of the workplace. And it's really important now more than ever that you really document those interactions. And I don't want to just sit here and say CYA, CYA, because that's not really what it's about. But I think it is really important that you don't forget that that conversation could become really important 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. So you want to make sure you record that it happened. And then I think the other thing is really focusing on the impacts that it's having on those outcomes, but also on the rest of the team. So, hey, when these deadlines are being missed, that's hurting our ability to deliver here. Tim had to stay up until midnight fixing that bug. And so I think making it really clear the impact that those behaviors are happening or having and saying why a change needs to occur, why it needs to happen.
We do love clear and consistent communication. Let's go with Craig.
In our organization here on a university campus, we don't have a whole lot in the tier 2 area. If we've had some mild intervention and explanation and reframing and then there doesn't seem to be if it's something that's performance based, if you're not meeting our expectations, that's one thing. But then also if there's a genuine care and concern for an individual that we need to elevate to another tier, a lot of times that goes into the realm of campus resources. Who are our partners? and we don't, who are our partners that we know we can trust to help this student with whatever issue is going on. But we don't really have hard data that we use, to do this. It is more an informal assessment. It is more observational. We see these things happening, and now we need to see about, we're probably not going to spend too much time at tier two. If that's not working, we're going to see what else is available. And one of the things we're blessed with on a university campus is a lot of folks who have access to resources that can help. We may not can help do it ourselves in certain cases, but we can open the doors to people who can. And that's what we try to convey to our students too, is we maybe can't, just like we tell our student leaders, we don't expect you to solve every problem. We can't necessarily solve every problem either. There are some things that are out of our realm. But in any way, if there are some things that take place that, all right, well, now this is escalated to where we've got to move this on to somebody else, we do try to communicate that this is happening and here's why. We're mandated to move this because this is what you've shown us, what you've demonstrated to us, what you've told us. And so we feel like we've got to bring in some other resources to help resolve the problem. And that's kind of how we operate that. There was, years ago, generations ago, there would be a lot of things that you could just handle within the band program. There was this internal discipline, and it's not too much different from what Jason was saying. We don't. It's not so much the litigious society that we live in, but it is a little bit about that when you're talking about following procedures, because if you misstep in the care and concern of a student that's really going through something serious, well, I mean, there's some potentially really bad outcomes from that, and you don't want to do that. That's the last thing you want to do.
Yeah, for sure. Being careful is an important aspect of this as well. And Paula.
So one of the things I'm going to kind of continue touching on is what Jason mentioned about that clear and consistent communication. So that is so important. And he's spot on with just documenting everything that you've done as well. So especially in the academic sense, a lot of times when we move somebody from a tier one intervention to a tier two, you're looking more at that small group targeted instruction. So again, that could be including a support class in their schedule. It could be moving them to a guided study hall. And at least in my experience, I have not really had that many students that have ever made it into a tier three intervention, because that's so significant. And most of the time, that tier two intervention of the small group targeted skills has led to them being the most successful. And even just particular students, maybe they just need that time to meet with you one-on-one during class, kind of a couple of times throughout the week. And maybe it's leading up to assessments. Maybe they just need that support and just how to study. And then typically that's led them to success. In terms of at the zoo, one of the things that we do, because there's about 10 of us that are supervisors and managers, so we're not all working on the same shifts, which is also it can lead to some difficulty when it comes to communication. But one of the things we've started doing over the past couple of years is having a communication log for all the people on our team. So if I've told Brittany that, hey, Brittany, make sure your phone is away while you're on the job, and then Craig told Brittany the same thing, and Jason told Brittany the same thing, all on the same day, or all on the same set of 3 days, but none of us were all there. None of us would know that, and Brittany's just kind of cruising along hearing the same thing and not kind of moving into that more tiered support on how can we best assist her in that, and making sure that she's focused on the job site, that kind of thing. So really keeping that consistent communication, but also when it comes to moving somebody into that second tier of support. At the zoo, we look at more so do you need another day of shadowing at that specific location that you're at? Do you need more support? Maybe you don't feel comfortable using the ticketing system. Maybe you need another day of training or shadowing from a supervisor. So we kind of look at that too, of where is the biggest focus that you need the most support in, and kind of going from there. And so a lot of times once we get to that, maybe you just need that extra day of shadowing, maybe you just don't feel comfortable in that specific area, kind of going off of that, and that has been the most successful, because a lot of times people just need a refresher if they have not been at a specific place at the zoo. And a lot of times, since we do tend to rotate staff around many different areas, so it might just been that maybe they needed that refresher since they haven't been there in 2 months.
Yeah, for sure. Being able to identify what the gaps are and kind of those reasons behind those gaps helps to individualize that support as well. Um, so Jason has kind of alluded to this a little bit, but has there ever been a time for you that you've tried using these support strategies and it didn't work the way that you planned on it? And kind of how did you recognize it and how did you make those adjustments? And for this one, we will start with Paula.
Awesome. So one of the things that when I think about is, especially in teaching, like there's so many things that might not reach every single student, especially when I have 125 students, it's hard to find that one size fits all puzzle piece that will reach every single student on that first try. So I feel like we're constantly trying to find different support strategies that can work in terms of what we're looking at that day in class. So currently my students are working on writing a essay comparing the theme of two different passages, one of them being a short story, the other one being a poem. And the writing is where students, I think, lack the confidence of being successful, even though they always are on the right track with where they're going. So I think it just, again, finding that right way that works for that particular student, because it might be what works for one student could be totally lost on another student. So I think, again, just making sure you have that support and trust, meeting with those particular students that need it the most, and kind of going through that explicit instruction too with them. Sometimes they just need to see it in a different way, even looking at different examples, different essays that have strong examples of how to write X, Y, and Z on there. So I think really focusing on what each student needs, and especially each, similar in the job sense, what each employee needs, because everyone's different. Maybe they need that hands-on training. Maybe they just need to go back to the training PowerPoint that we did at the beginning of their job experience too. So it kind of depends on where you're at and what each person and each student needs.
Awesome. And we'll go with Jason.
Yeah, I did allude to my example a little bit that I would talk about, which is um, I manage, like I mentioned, different groups, different people working in different areas. And sometimes some of those require a little more attention than others too. Um, but I had a case where I had a software engineer that, I actually really wanted to take to tier three. And tier three in my kind of setting is really a performance improvement plan, or a PIP. And if you get to that point with somebody, you are pretty sure that they're not going to stick around, right? A PIP, you really hope that somebody can turn it around, but realistically, when you get to a PIP with somebody, it's quite likely they don't. They start looking that they're done. So I wanted to do that because they weren't meeting expectations consistently. But I sat and thought a lot about it, and I came to feel that I hadn't given them enough of a chance at tier two because I hadn't tried enough different ways to get through to them. I hadn't been hands-on enough, meeting with them regularly, in part because I had a lot of other responsibilities and a lot of other people. And so that was a situation where I brought in a middle manager between me and that person's team. And so what that allowed me to do is to work with that manager who then is providing that tier two support to that person. And that person is really thriving in that tier two setting with the hands-on. It turns out that that occasional check-in with the manager wasn't enough for that person right now. They didn't have as much experience. They maybe were quickly promoted and haven't yet developed some of those work skills that they need to self-drive and self-direct, especially in a remote first setting. And so bringing in that person who can be a little more hands-on is allowing them to succeed. And I think that's really important. And it goes back to something I said earlier too about that more than a management philosophy, you need to meet people where they're at, and you need to try different techniques, different styles to get through to them. So if you manage people that always love to talk on the phone and that's the way to get through to them, and you hate talking on the phone, you might have to call them, like you have to try to meet people where they're at to get through to them, because I think in some ways it's a fairness thing. You have to really give a real try at each level of this tier before it's reasonable for you to move somebody to that next level. Look, I wasn't going to get legally in trouble with parting ways with this person. I documented my things, but I think at the end of the day, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to the people that you manage to give them the best chance to succeed before making a decision that will have real impacts even to the others who aren't necessarily impacted by that decision.
Awesome. And we will go with Craig.
Well, I feel very fortunate that over my time here at State that um, students that have exhibited, and a lot of what I've said tonight has been along the behavior side of things as much as the performance side, because that's what's perhaps closest to us and how we encounter some of our students. In a large ensemble setting, you can't tell if one trumpet player is necessarily playing worse than all the others when there's 68 trumpets. It's a little bit hard to tell. But on the behavior side, that's where you can see a little bit more of it. And I want to just reflect on something I was saying. You know, when I say we don't spend a lot of time on tier two, if we have to go to tier three, that's not always a bad thing, because that's where we get in our case, you know, Jason, I understand exactly where you're coming from. That's you are dealing with potentially an unfavorable outcome. But for us, that means that the experts are now involved in helping resolve the situation. And so, you know, if there are the rare occasions where we're not able to help or to bring it to a successful conclusion, then we're very fortunate on our campus to have a lot of different resources to help reach to a conclusion. And on those occasions where maybe it just hasn't worked for the students, it could just be that there are just some external factors that are just out of your control. You just can't the student can't, or you can't help them overcome whatever they're facing. And thankfully that's been very, very rare. I do think that our students, most of the students we see are generally speaking, now that they're generally well adjusted, they're mature, they meet our expectations, they're able to meet our expectations within the context of everything else they have going on in life. And that's very good to be able to have such a large group and be able to honestly say that. But on the times where it hasn't worked in, you know, locally at tier one or maybe even at tier two, the resources, which is what I consider tier three, the campus resources that we routinely have to go to, maybe the counseling center, the disability support, or the advising center. Things like that are the Office of Civil Rights Compliance. Those are things that are excellent resources that we've been able to partner with to resolve issues that we couldn't resolve within our own office.
Awesome. Um, our last prepared question is you'll have all kind of alluded to this in some different contexts. Craig with your student leadership, Paula with some of the other management staff that you work with. But how do you help others to use these tiered support systems effectively rather than making yourself the exclusive problem solver? And we'll start with Craig on this one.
Well, yeah, I've talked a lot about our leadership team because it's vital to the success of our program, socially and musically. I mean, those are the two big tiers of, or pillars. I won't say tiers because that's two big pillars of a major college band program is the musical experience and the social experience. They help us with both, but they're also the ones that are the first line of defense, if you will, in identifying some of those challenges. And I will say too that we don't just throw them out there and say, go solve the problems. We try to offer them some training. We offer them, these are things that we've observed through the years that might help you. Here's this expert from campus who's going to come in and say, you can look for these things. These are things that you can try. And it all centers around, wanting the program to be successful and realizing that we, as the three of us, cannot possibly manage all of this for 420 students. We have to rely on you. So we empower our student leaders and give them that responsibility without hopefully not overburdening them with that responsibility of helping maintain the good social experience and the good musical experience that our students have.
Awesome. We'll go with Jason.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to something we said at the very beginning of this discussion, which is modeling. Demonstrating that behavior throughout and being consistent with those who work for you, and then asking those people to do the same with people who work for them. I think that's really important. I also like to really encourage people to rely on structure and systems, and rather than gut feelings, because I think gut feelings can be sometimes where we get in trouble of, oh, I don't really vibe with this, or that felt bad. Okay, what was it that was problematic about it? And give people lots of chances. I think we also always have to remember that it doesn't necessarily help us long term to solve the problem today. So I know for me, this is really hard. But if somebody comes to me with something, I have to resist the temptation to solve that problem right then and there and to allow it time to work itself out. Um, the last thing that I think can be really helpful is I talk about a culture of trust a lot within my work. So it's basically assuming that other people come with good intentions. If someone didn't deliver what they said they were going to deliver on time, let's understand why, right? They're going to if somebody comes to me to complain, Timmy didn't deliver his pull request on time. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Let's talk to Timmy about it. Let's understand what's happening there. I'm sure there was a good reason why that didn't happen. Because if you start to take away that trust, um, we really replace that with skepticism and blame and all these negative emotions, which goes back to our beginning about psychological safety and inclusivity. It all falls apart. So I think that's another thing that's really important is really assume the best. You really got to assume the best in all these people and assume that if they could, they would succeed. So let's try to figure out what's going on to help everybody succeed at the end of the day.
Awesome. And rounding it out with Paula.
Absolutely. So again, in my both of my roles, again, whether that's teaching or at the zoo, we're are so much of what I do is team driven. So at school, I'm on a team of five, and that's just the people that I teach with every day. That doesn't include all of the support staff as well that play such a vital role. So again, so much of that, I don't necessarily experience the being the sole problem solver because we all come together at our weekly team meetings to see what we can all do. Again, I may not have that answer, but chances are there's somebody in that room that does. And similar to my role at the zoo, we also all kind of work together to see what everybody's expertise is in, because some people may be experts in the ticketing side of things, some may be experts in more of the like large scale event planning side of things, some may be experts in just the overall institutional knowledge. So really working together, and I think just kind of sharing everybody's expertise is kind of the best part about it, because even though I may not have the answer to everything, somebody else does, or even just reshaping and reframing how we're approaching something, I think is huge too. Because even just in our weekly meetings as a ELA department, we all are kind of navigating through just different lessons. We're all teaching the same thing, but all of us are looking at it in three different lenses, three different viewpoints, three different backgrounds and experiences. So really talking through kind of where we can problem solve together, because maybe I see it with something one way and one of my other teachers sees it in a different way. And then we kind of talk through that to see how we can best support our students to make sure that they are understanding what we're teaching, and meeting them where they're at, but also moving them forward as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the kind of what everyone has kind of alluded to with this of being able to acknowledge when something isn't working, whether that's because of something that you personally have done, like in your communication style, whether like the system itself just isn't working for people. So it's really cool to see kind of how those all tie together across these different fields. We did have a submitted question from someone in the chat. They manage a group of student employees at a university, so it feels kind of like a mix of the different experiences of our panelists. The question is, how do you balance supporting student employees' development as learners while still holding them accountable to the expectations of a real job, including making difficult decisions like termination if necessary? It can feel like two conflicting choose your own adventures at once. And anyone who has it wants to tackle this can do it.
Well, I'll mention one thing. I think when you're managing a group of student leaders, student employees, um, I think maybe the most important word is grace, as much as you can possibly extend it to these learners. And I'm speaking a little bit from experience right now is my son has his first job, in the retail world, and he's doing really well. He loves his job, but there have been some bumps along the road, and his manager's been very supportive. And there have been some times that, that he's had to just kind of like, oh, wow, this is an eye-opening thing. And that's That is just part of the learning and growing process. That's probably what you see with your student employees. I think there's a kind of a philosophy of in education as well, from an administrative standpoint, is you want to try your best to support your employees publicly and then correct them privately if they need some redirection. And so I'll leave that and then let my colleagues mention their experience as well.
I love Craig's answer, especially about grace, and I think giving people lots of chances, always asking yourself, are you setting clear enough expectations? Have you let them know, especially privately, have you let them know what needs to change here? I also think, something mentioned in this question about managing a group of. I think managing a group of is always difficult because going back to, what we've discussed so far, everybody's different and everybody needs a little bit of a different thing. So I think whenever possible, you kind of have to splinter them out, not even compare them to each other, but think about them as individuals and think about, do I understand the context? Have I given, even if I've told 3 other people, you better be on time, have I told that person that they should be on time? Because, everybody needs to get the same chances and have the same opportunities to succeed or fail. I've had the privilege of being a few people's first manager, and I think being someone's first manager is a huge privilege, but it also is a real responsibility. You're setting that pace, that expectation for what they'll compare their next and later jobs to. So at the end of the day, you actually aren't really doing them any favors with holding feedback or keeping them from even that really tough moment of being fired, because that might just be what they need, right? They might need, because that next manager is maybe not going to treat them with that same degree of grace. So I think it's both important to have that grace and to give people lots of chances, but also they are employees in this case, and it is important that you treat them as such and really give them that experience that they can then carry on to the rest of their career and anchor based on.
And I think going off of that too, especially focusing on their development as student workers or students as well, because that is important too to keep in mind that they are college age students. So again, going off of what Craig said about showing them grace, but I also like to think about it in just how we interact as a fraternity too. Like we hold our students accountable to higher levels as well, but also we want to make sure that what we're doing is matching what we're expecting too. So keeping in mind like how you're soliciting feedback too. So are you giving feedback that they are able to act upon, and that they're able to understand? Because maybe some of the student workers might need verbal feedback. Some students might be that type of learner, but maybe some students just need that written feedback too. Maybe having that conversation is just going to go through one ear out the other. And if they're not able to accept the feedback and act upon that, that might be an opportunity as well, because I know even just in my classroom too, feedback looks so different depending on every student. So we still want to hold them accountable for what they're doing, but maybe the feedback that we're giving is just not what they need at that moment. But I think we also do need to show them and kind of like guide them in that direction of this is the expectation, this is the end result that we're looking for. If like what can I do to help support you in getting to that result? Because I think just knowing that you're there to support them and kind of putting it almost in a way like the ball is in their court, but what can I do to help you too is important, to help get them to that finish line. Because it's kind of like that relay race and track of everybody's kind of passing that baton, but ultimately they're the ones responsible for kind of driving to that finish line.
Awesome. I hope that answered your question, person who submitted. It does seem so. Um, Alrighty, those are all of the questions that have been prepared and or submitted. Anyone have any wrap up thoughts, things that they didn't get to express previously? Um, parting words of wisdom before we close out for tonight?
Nope, I was just gonna say thank you for giving us this opportunity. It was really cool. Because kind of going into this, like I think of MTSS so much in the educational side of things. So it was really cool to see how many overlaps there are in not only the college band world, but also the job focus as well. So it was really cool to see just how many overlaps there are and how many similarities we all have, and just kind of hearing all of the different perspectives that everybody brings. So it was a really interesting call tonight. So I appreciate you, Brittany, for putting this together too.
Echo that. Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate you putting this together and appreciate the invitation to be a part of it. I've enjoyed the perspectives for sure.
I don't think I can say anything new after that, but thank you as well, Brittany. I think it's been really interesting, and I think I don't think about very often about how different an educational setting might be, or dealing with. I can't imagine 350, 400, 450 people, how that might be. So, it was really interesting, and I think Brittany, nice job getting a pretty different group together for this. So,
I accept all praise. But thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for participating tonight and offering your insight and your various areas of expertise. We hope that you will join us for our next fireside chat on March 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern. But that is it for us for tonight. Thank you so much.